Well, we have been reading through the book of Mark this week, and as I mentioned this morning, Mark reads a whole lot differently than Matthew does. Mark is very abrupt, to the point, tell the story, move on. With most of his stories. However, in some of his stories, he actually gives a little bit more detail than what Matthew gives. Some of his stories come across, you can tell that these stories stuck out more to Peter than others. And that's a part of the beauty of reading through the New Testament. As we see the different authors, we see from their different perspectives, and we see what was more meaningful to Peter and what was more meaningful to Mark as Mark listened to Peter, and you see what was different, what was meaningful to Matthew, you see what was meaningful to John, and Luke just gathered his information from everywhere. So you see the different parts of the gospel story that really stick out. And this week, for myself, as I was reading, I just felt like there was a sense of, that was quick. He's so abrupt in his stories. I mean, they're just, boom, a few verses, story's over, and move on. I don't know if anybody else felt that way, but this week as I was reading, it's just like, okay, probably could have said a little bit more about that, but that's okay, we'll move on. Any questions over our reading last week as we get started? Okay, hang on just a second. Go ahead and ask that question in the microphone, and then we can get it in the recording.
Okay. I can't find it, but it's about the old cloth and the new wine.
That's actually where Jesus is talking, or they're asking about fasting. Who would patch old clothing with new cloth? It's in chapter 2, verse 21. And no one puts new wine into old wineskins, for the wine would burst the wineskins. This is bringing some practical wisdom into the story that is unfolding before their eyes. It was very well known at that time that you did not put old or new wine into old wineskins because the new wine would absolutely burst the skins. When you're patching cloth or patching clothes, not that we do that very much anymore. I mean, in our culture, we just go buy new. But for the most part, most cultures have patched their clothing when they get holes in them. You want to make sure that you're using the same type of fabric when you're patching that. Otherwise, when you wash it, it will shrink at a different rate and it'll rip off of there. So that's the practical wisdom. Now, how does that apply to the story that's unfolding? Is what Jesus is saying is, they're asking him about fasting. Why do your disciples not fast like the Pharisees and John's disciples do? And Jesus is saying, you know what? This is a new story. This is a new message that's unfolding before you. So don't just assume that everything is going to be like it was. Don't just try to fit the gospel into the old wineskins of the law. It's a new thing. It's going to be different. The world had never seen God incarnate, God living among the people before. So it was approached very differently than what they were used to and what they had lived in the Old Testament. In the Old Testament, they were fasting because they were looking forward to God's deliverance. And what Jesus is saying is, deliverance is here, hello. I'm the one that's going to take care of all that. So don't try to make an old system fit what is taking place. Does that make sense? So the old wineskins, or the new wine in the old wineskins, is don't try to put the gospel and make it fit into all of the same containers as the law, because it just won't fit. It bursts out of it. This is something new. Okay?
Good note on it. In my Bible, it talks about your heart being rigid.
Remember the microphone for the recording. And
your heart becomes rigid like an old wineskin, and we receive a new heart that our heart needs to be pliable and flexible. like a new wineskin would be.
Right, yeah, that would be the application of it, is that, yeah. So we can't be too rigid. We can't expect everything to always be the way that it was. Any other questions before we get started with tonight's lesson? Okay, here we go. The reading this week, we're going to start with a little bit of what we read last week, just because the section that we're in, like I said this morning, Mark picks a bunch of stories that fit together, puts them all together because their topic is the same, regardless of what order they happened in. So the first section that we're going to deal with today is the fact that Jesus is Lord over all. Jesus is Lord over all. The first story that fits in with this theme is Jesus calming the storm. When Jesus calms the storm, he shows the disciples that he is the Lord over all creation. Remember the story, and it's in chapter 4. As evening came, Jesus said to his disciples, "Let's cross to the other side of the lake." So they took Jesus in the boat and started out, leaving the crowds behind. But soon a fierce storm came up. High waves were breaking into the boat, and it began to fill with water. Jesus was sleeping in the back of the boat with his head on a cushion. The disciples woke him, shouting, "Teacher, don't you care that we're going to drown?" And when he woke up, he rebuked the wind and said to the waves, "Silence, be still." And suddenly the wind stopped, and there was a great calm. We looked at this a little bit when we looked at Matthew. Have any of you ever had the ability or had the opportunity just to stand up in the middle of a storm and say, "Stop it!" And the storm just stop? No. Unless it was just absolute coincidence. We don't have that authority, and no human has ever had that authority. So when Jesus, the reason that Mark put this to start this section is because he wants us to understand that this is not just another guy. This guy has the authority over all of creation. He has the authority over the weather. Nobody else has ever has been or ever will be able to do this. Now, we pay the weather people today a lot of money, somebody does, to try to guess what the weather's going to do. But it's interesting, as you watch the weather people, as they sense that a storm is coming, they will, you'll notice an antsiness about them. They sense that something's about to happen. They don't know for sure. They're excited about it because this is what they study. This is what they're looking forward to understanding and watching it unfold. But they have no control over it. And Mark is pointing out that Jesus is in charge of. He can control. He can change the weather patterns. He is Lord over all. The next thing that we see is the story of Jesus healing a demon-possessed man. And we see in this story, and we're going to look at this story in a little bit more detail, we see that Jesus is even Lord over the demons. He's not only Lord over all creation, but he's also the Lord over all of the demons. And we read in this story how they cower in fear when Jesus comes around. They say, why are you here to mess with us? Don't torment us. He is the Lord over the demons. Then we see a section called Jesus Heals in Response to Faith, where we see two stories unfolding at the same time. We see that a man named Jairus has come and asked Jesus to help his daughter who is sick. And when he's on his way to help Jairus' daughter, then he's stopped because a lady who has been bleeding for years comes to him and just touches the hem of his garment to be healed. In the process, this lady is healed, and Jairus' daughter dies. But Jesus says to Jairus, "Don't worry. She's not dead, she's just asleep." So we see in this that Jesus is the Lord over illness when he heals this woman, but we also see that he is the Lord over death when he raises this child back to life. So understand as we get started in this section that Mark is trying to show that Jesus is Lord over all. He's Lord over all creation. He is Lord over the demons. He is Lord over the illnesses. He is Lord over death. He's Lord of all. That's an awesome God, isn't it? I want us to look at the story of the demon-possessed man, because this is one of those stories where I think Mark gives a little bit more detail than Matthew does. They arrive in this area, and I want you to understand, first of all, that this is an unclean story. Now, when I say unclean, I mean this story is in violation of the law in almost every area. Because first of all, they're in an unclean setting. They're in the region of the Gerasenes, or the Gentile area. An area where Jews were not supposed to go because there were so many Gentiles there. The area of the Decapolis, or 10 cities is how the New Living translates this, was an area of cities that was just crawling with Gentiles, in kind of sunk in the middle of Palestine. And these Gentiles were there. They were making their money off of the Jews. This is where the Gentiles would go for their recreation. They would have gymnasiums there. They would have the amphitheaters there. They would have the temples there to the pagan gods. So this is a terribly dirty area for Jews. But Jesus, first of all, goes into this unclean setting. He's confronted when he gets there by unclean spirits. Most of the time you would see these spirits and you would just turn around and run the other way. I don't think it was yours, Judy, or you forgot your phone. It's still ringing up here. So he was confronted by the unclean spirits. And then the story takes place in a cemetery. Now, the Jews did not hang around in cemeteries. God had told them to stay away from cemeteries simply because there are a lot of diseases in cemeteries and you stay away from dead people. Now, understand the reason that God gave all of these rules to the Jewish people was because they weren't smart enough to figure out how to stay alive. They had been slaves for 400 years. They didn't know how to do anything because they had just been told, go and do this, and if you die, who cares? There's too many of you anyway. So when they come out of Egypt, they're a group of people who have no knowledge as to how to proceed in life. They don't know what it means to take care of themselves. They don't know what food to cook. They've just eaten what was placed in front of them as slaves. And God gave them a whole list of rules to try to keep them safe. You know, we know as individuals that if you come along a dead body, you don't just run up and touch it because they're dead for a reason. And there may be something contagious there, and you don't want to touch it until you know what's happened there. Or in our culture, we put on rubber gloves before they touch it. They didn't know that in that time period, and God gave them these rules to keep them safe. So he would say, don't go into a cemetery. He would tell them to stay away from the Gentiles because these Jewish people, they were just super happy to follow whatever God came along. And God was saying, stay away from those other gods. There were pagan temples in these cities. Don't go there because you'll worship their gods. You're not intelligent like that. I've started to say you're stupid like that, but I don't want to say that. But they were. They would just fall after whatever was there. And then the demons begged to be cast into unclean animals. Pigs. Now, Bob, you sell a lot of pork, don't you? If I were to come in and buy pork and say, can I go home and eat this raw, what would you tell me? No, why not? It's not cooked? Now, if I were to eat beef, and I could eat beef rare, can I eat pork rare? Why not? You can get sick. See, the reason that God told the Jewish people not to eat pork, simply because pork is one of the most dangerous meats if you don't cook it well. And he said, stay away from meats that if you don't cook them right, because you know what? They didn't have the meat thermometers that we have today. They didn't have the cook stoves that could regulate the heat. And so God just said, stay away from them. Doesn't mean that pork's bad. I like ribs. But in that culture, they didn't know how to cook it, and God just said, stay away from it. But I want us to understand that the uncleanness of the setting of this story. And the man that he's talking to, there is nothing in this story that makes us think that this guy's a Jew. Everything in this story points to the fact that this guy's a Gentile. somebody that Jesus shouldn't have been talking to in the first place. Let's see how the story unfolds. Chapter 5, verses 3 through 5. I kind of bullet pointed this just so you could get a clue of who this man was. First of all, this man lived among the burial caves. He spent his life, he didn't have a house, he lived in the cemetery. He could no longer be restrained, even with the chain. Whenever he was put into chains and shackles, as he often was, he snapped the chains from his wrist and smashed the shackles. No one was strong enough to subdue him. Day and night he wandered around the burial caves and in the hills, howling and cutting himself with sharp stones. As I was reading through this, and I haven't looked back to Matthew, I was kind of in a rush this afternoon to see what details Matthew gave, but this seems like a pretty detailed description of this guy, doesn't it? There's a whole lot in this story that tells us this guy is pretty miserable. This is not the life that we want for our children. To be living in the caves, in the burial caves. He couldn't be restrained, but he was. They had tried to restrain this guy regularly, and he would snap the chains. It's interesting because they were trying to restrain him not just for their own safety, but for his safety as well. He's sitting around howling and cutting himself with sharp stones because he's so miserable. You see the misery that this guy is in. When Jesus comes, he says with a shriek, "Why are you interfering with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? In the name of God, I beg you, don't torture me." Now, we don't have in this setting, or this story, that Jesus came up and said, "Hi, I'm Jesus, Son of the Most High God." The demons recognized Jesus. They knew who he was, and they got scared. And in their fear, they said this. It says, "Don't torture me." What are they doing to this man? Now, if that's not torture, what this man is dealing with, I don't know what is. Don't torture me. Now, the man, at this point in time, is pretty confused. He does not realize that Jesus can bring an end to the torture. You see, he's still caught up in thinking he can figure this out on his own. Do not torture me. I beg you, don't torture me. And then Jesus takes care of him. Isn't this amazing to see how Jesus sends these demons? Their name is Legion because there are many. He sends them into the pigs. 2,000 pigs go rolling over the hill into the sea. Now the Jews are applauding this story. It's like, yeah, get rid of those unclean animals. And the demons drown with the pigs. Jesus granted their request. He did not torture them, but he still made sure that they were done. Interesting turn of events. The people of the town, the herdsmen who are watching these pigs, watch their pigs go over the hill. And they go into town to tell their bosses, we don't know exactly what happened, but there was this guy that came out of a boat, and he gets out of the boat, and he talks to this crazy guy that's been running around the tombs, and all of a sudden our pigs go rolling into the sea. Can you imagine them trying to explain this to their bosses as to why their pigs just drowned? And their bosses are looking at them thinking, what were you drinking? You're supposed to be working. And you let all of our pigs jump into the sea? And the people of the town come out to see what's going on. Is this April 1st or this is an April Fool's joke? What's going on? Are our pigs really dead? And if so, why? And they come out and they see this man that they have been so fearful of, this man that they've tried to bind in chains, sitting, neatly dressed, calm, peaceful. How many of you have seen the news story about the guy that's running around in, I think it's in Utah, randomly breaking into people's cabins, destroying the cabins? Has anybody seen this story? There's a guy, they finally ID'd him. Somebody had a hidden camera in their cabin. But he's just going around into cabins where people usually spend summer cabins. He's going around in the winter, living off in their cabins and tearing them to pieces. And writing threatening notes, "You get off my mountain." Now there's a picture of this guy carrying a gun. Somebody had a wildlife camera that they caught a picture of this guy carrying a gun. And he's a pretty intimidating looking guy. And people are afraid to go to their cabins because they're afraid that he's going to be there and then he'll do something to them. It's kind of the same scenario that we see here. These people were probably afraid to come put flowers on their loved ones' graves because there's this crazy man running around the cemetery and they don't want to get killed. And now all of a sudden they come to the cemetery and they see this guy just sitting there peacefully. Neatly dressed. This guy's been naked for years. You know, it's one of those kids, watch out, here comes Crazy John or whatever his name is. And now he's sitting there neatly dressed and calm and peaceful and in love with Jesus. The people of the town, they're still trying to process their losses. What in the world's going on here? We just lost all our pigs. You know, what's for dinner? Our answer would be beef. But they're thinking, we want the other white meat. And they just tell Jesus, "Jesus, go. We don't want you around here." And as Jesus was getting into the boat, this picks up in verse 18, the man who had been demon-possessed begged to go with him. But Jesus said, "No." Now I want us to understand some of the reasons why Jesus may have said no. When we look at the book of Acts, we're going to see that Paul gets arrested a number of times. One of the times that Paul gets arrested, the final time that Paul gets arrested in Jerusalem, the people are angry because he's hanging out with a Gentile, and they're making accusations that he brought the Gentile into the temple. Now, if Jesus says to this Gentile, "Yes, come with me," he's going to have to tell this Gentile, "I'm sorry, but you can't go into my Father's house because these people aren't ready for you." And he recognizes in this man that this is a man who's not going to peacefully stand by and watch while people mistreat Jesus. He's still a big, strong man. They couldn't hold him with chains. Peter cut off the soldier's ear. What do you think this guy would have done when they came to arrest Jesus? Jesus had to say to this man, "You know what? I am so glad that you're seeing the life that I've created you for. I'm so glad that you're in love with me. But no, you stay here." And he told this man something that he didn't tell anybody else. Every Jew that he healed, he would tell them, "Go and tell no one. Don't tell anybody what just happened. Go in secret." He tells this guy, "No, go home to your family and tell them everything the Lord has done for you and how merciful he has been." So the man started off to visit the 10 towns of that region and began to proclaim the great things Jesus had done for him, and everyone was amazed at what he told them. Now, this word proclaim is not the word for just telling a story. This is the word for preaching. This is the same Greek word that's used for John the Baptist preaching in the desert. Jesus told him, "No, go tell your family." Because his family's all Gentiles too. And he does. We're going to come back to that. Let's look at the stories of Jesus healing in response to faith. Jairus' daughter was sick and near death, and she eventually dies, and Jesus raises her back to life. At the same time that all this is taking place, Jesus deals with the unclean woman. He's walking with his disciples and a huge crowd to Jairus' house because the people get the feeling that a miracle is about to happen. A sick little girl is going to be healed, and they want to be there for that. I mean, that's kind of like our TV shows. If somebody's, Extreme Makeover. If somebody's getting something good, we all want to see it. And the whole crowd, the throngs, are just going along with Jesus, and now we want to be a part of this. And as he's going, there was a woman in the crowd who had suffered for 12 years with uncontrollable bleeding. Mark tells us that she had exhausted all of her resources trying to pay doctors to heal her. And he uses the phrase, he said, she had not gotten better. In fact, she had gotten far worse. Do you see the hopelessness that this woman lived with? Because understand that this is not our current day culture, where if someone is ill or someone has a sickness, that we love them and we take care of them. In that culture, if you had an illness, if you had a sickness, if you were bleeding constantly, bleeding made you unclean, and you were absolutely ostracized. This story doesn't tell us this, but one can imagine that she's lost her. If she had a husband, she's lost him. He's divorced her because of her bleeding. Therefore, she has no family. Her family will have nothing to do with her. She probably has to spend most of her time living outside of town because she cannot be in town around other people with this bleeding constantly taking place. She's exhausted everything. She has lost everything. And she gets this idea. She hears that Jesus is in the area. And she gets this idea, if I can only touch the corner of his robe, I can be healed. Part of this is probably because she feels like she has no right to come and ask him to heal her because she is an unclean woman. And so she's walking, she sees Jesus, she squeezes through the crowd, and she touches his robe, and all of a sudden she senses that the bleeding has stopped. She senses in her body that she has been healed. And she's excited until Jesus said, "Who touched me?" Now this is interesting because he's in this huge crowd of people. I mean, imagine with me, if you watch Extreme Makeover Home Edition, when they're pulling the family in the limousine and hiding them behind the bus, and they do the camera pan on all the people that are out there to see this unveiling. There's all these people who have gathered around and they're excited. They're looking forward to this miracle that Jesus is about to perform for this little girl. And there's no yellow caution tape to keep them back. And Jesus said, "Who touched me?" And his disciples think he's crazy. They're like, which one of the 150 people that are here just touched you? We all touched you. We're all being pushed together. And Jesus said, "No, somebody just touched me because I felt the healing power leave my body." And then this woman comes trembling. And she puts her head down and she raises her hand. And look at how Jesus responds to her. He doesn't say, "How dare you touch me, you unclean woman?" He says, "Daughter." Daughter. In our culture, he says, "Princess." You're special. And it's okay. You're not dirty anymore. Your faith has made you whole. You're healed. How powerful of a moment. But that moment is broken by the reports from Jairus' household coming and saying, "I'm sorry, but your daughter's dead. It's too late. Don't trouble the master any longer." And Jesus responds and says, "No, wait a second. She's not dead, she's only asleep." And everybody laughs at him. They know better. And Jesus goes along and he raises this little girl to life. He is Lord over all. He's the Lord over the illness. He's the Lord over the demons. He's the Lord over the storm. He is the Lord over death. He's Lord over all. Then Mark switches gears. He starts to show what one commentator called the mountains and the valleys of ministry. At some point, again, we don't know the exact order, Jesus decides to go back home and see his family. He pulls into town, gets a room at the Motel 8, unpacks his stuff, takes a shower, watches a TV show, goes out to meet the crowds. And they're all amazed at his teaching. But then they start to say, but wait a second, isn't this... And I think that Mark is the one that says this. He's just a carpenter, the son of Mary. Now notice they do not say the son of Mary and Joseph. In other words, isn't this illegitimate little kid that used to run around here? We all knew the story. We all knew mom and dad weren't married when mom got pregnant. She claimed some miracle. Yeah, right, we all know better than that. We know his brothers and how much of heathens those little kids were. I'm trying to think of a nice way to phrase that. We don't believe this guy. One of the gospel writers actually tells us that they took Jesus out, tried to throw him over a cliff. I think it's Luke that tells us that. And Jesus simply turns around and walks away and said, a prophet is honored everywhere except in his own hometown and among his own relatives and family. I pointed this out some this morning and when I was looking at misunderstandings, because our family does misunderstand us, and sometimes our families just flat out reject us. And there's nothing that we can do about that. Jesus experienced that too. Then Jesus sends out the 12. Now, I just want you to notice that in Matthew, this was an entire chapter. This was a huge section of red letter writing. And here it gets just a few verses. Mark really compiles this story. So remember, Mark was written first. So when Matthew read Mark's point, he's like, oh, let me tell you what Jesus said that day. And so Matthew wrote all this out. With Mark, it's just a few verses. Then we look at the death of John the Baptist. Just same story, almost verbatim as what Matthew has written. We see this kind of as a flashback. John is in prison. Jesus gets the news of, or actually, Herod hears about Jesus and says, well, this must be John the Baptist come back to life. And then it kind of flashes back and tells us the story of John the Baptist's death. Herod is the son of Herod the Great. He was 17 years old when his father died, and was not originally given a piece of his father's kingdom, but he was later given a piece and ruled from 4 BC to 39 AD. He fell in love with his brother's wife, and so his brother's wife left his brother and married him. John the Baptist didn't mince words and said, Herod, you can't do that. That's sin. That's wrong. You can't marry your brother's wife unless he's dead. Wrong answer. And so Herod had John put in prison. Herod's new wife liked John even less than Herod did. Herod actually, we believe Herod enjoyed visiting with John and would go and see him in prison and talk to him. But his wife didn't like him at all. And so she had her daughter, after her daughter performed beautifully at a dance recital. It wasn't a recital, but anyway. Herod, her mother told her, go and ask for John the Baptist's head on a platter. And so John the Baptist was killed. So we see this story unfold almost verbatim as what we see in Matthew. In fact, my PowerPoint's verbatim from what we saw in Matthew too, except I changed verses 17 through 29. Anyway, then we come into some miracle stories. We start to see some miracles. The feeding of the 5,000. Somebody read verse 39 of chapter 6. On the green grass. Now here's Mr. Mark that doesn't do details, but Peter remembered what color the grass was. And for some reason, I mean, Matthew doesn't mention this, Luke doesn't mention this, but Mark mentions that the grass was green. Interesting take on it. Apparently, Peter liked grass. But it's very much the same story as what we read in Matthew. Then we see Jesus walks on water. Now, in this story, there's a couple of details that are different. The first difference is in verse 48. He saw that they were in serious trouble, rowing hard and struggling against the wind and waves. At about 3 o'clock in the morning, Jesus came toward them, walking on the water. He intended to go past them. Now, Matthew doesn't mention that. Here the disciples are out there scared to death in this boat. Jesus isn't there to holler at this time. And they're thinking, we're going to die. And they see this ghostly-looking figure walking on the water. And I think that Jesus is showing a sense of humor. Because remember the last time that they were scared, what did Jesus say before he calmed the storm? He said, "Oh, you have little faith." And I think he's showing his sense of humor here. He's out for a nice leisurely stroll, not getting too excited about the waves, just stepping over them when they come. And he looks like he's going to walk right past them. In other words, saying, what are you guys laboring so hard for over in that boat? They're rowing vigorously, and some are rowing, and some are bailing out. And Jesus is just out for a walk, like, hey guys, what's up? See you on the other side. And they're like, oh no, it's a ghost. And Jesus, it's me. And anyway, he gets in the boat, calms the storm. Interestingly, this story is told from Peter's perspective. Peter was a humble guy, believe it or not, at this point when this story is being told. And he doesn't want Mark to include the part of him walking on the water. I think that usually we don't want all the details of our own life told. I mean, somebody else will tell that story, but I'm not going to tell that story because I don't want to draw attention to me. Peter doesn't want to draw the attention to himself. Then we see a section of teaching where Jesus talks about inner purity. The Pharisees come up again. Why do your disciples not wash their hands before they eat? And then Jesus goes off onto this nice little sermonette or tirade or soapbox, whatever you want to call it, telling them, you know what, guys, it's not about washing your hands. It's about being pure, and you're not. You may wash your hands, but your insides are so dirty, it doesn't matter how many times you wash you can rub the skin off of your hands, and the food that you eat is going to be filthy by the time it gets to your stomach because your your stomach is so dirty. Why are you worrying about washing hands when your hearts are so sinful? It's not the washing of our hands, but the washing of our hearts. All right, then we're going to jump back. Jesus feeds the 4,000. Chapter 7, verse 31. Somebody read that for us. Okay, so Jesus is back in the Decapolis. He's back in this unclean area where we started today's reading with the demon-possessed man. He hasn't been back there since. There's no other place in Scripture. These are the only 2 times in Scripture where Jesus is mentioned as being in the Decapolis, the 10 towns. This is it. So the first time he healed this man, and the second time he comes back, there's a great crowd gathered to hear Jesus. Where did this crowd come from? These are Gentiles. They're not looking for a Messiah. They're down at the theater. Where did this crowd come from? This man, he went around telling everybody what Jesus had done for him. And then when Jesus came back in the area, he went back and, guys, he's here, he's back. He's back. Come and see what I told you about. Now, the last time that he was here, the townspeople met him and said, I'm sorry, we don't want you here. And this time there's over 4,000 people gathered to meet him. So much so, so excited to hear what he has to say that they're not paying attention to their stomachs. Now, if I kept talking for hours, you guys would eventually start dismissing yourself. You would start calling one another on your cell phones. Oh, I got to call, I got to go. Because your stomachs would be growling. You'd be ready for bed. These people were so mesmerized by what Jesus was saying that they didn't realize there's nowhere to get food out here. This was a group of Gentiles. They hadn't heard the story of Jesus feeding the 5,000. They didn't talk to those Jews. Those Jews wouldn't tell them anything. A Gentile would ask the Jew what time of the day it is, and the Jew wouldn't even tell him. He'd just turn around and walk away. They didn't know the story of Jesus feeding the 5,000, but they're so mesmerized by what Jesus is saying. They're so mesmerized by the difference that he made in this man's life that they don't even see the time going by. And all of a sudden, they're hungry. The disciples say, Jesus, you got to send this crowd away. They've got to go eat. And Jesus says, no, you feed them. This illustrates powerfully the impact that one person can have. Not one person by themselves, but one person who is in love with Jesus. If I gave any of you the command to go, I'm going to come back in 3 months, and when I come back, I want 4,000 gathered to meet me, or I'm not going to talk, I'm not going to be here, you would all laugh at me and call the DS and say, okay, who else you got for us? Because you're not that in love with me. And because I don't deserve that kind of love. But this man was so in love with Jesus. He didn't know if Jesus was coming back or not. I mean, Jesus didn't say, go get people ready, I'm going to come back. He said, go tell everybody what I've done for you. And this man didn't say, well, I don't know when Jesus is coming back, so I don't know if I'm going to tell anybody or not. He just went and told everybody. He was so excited. He was so in love with Jesus. And Jesus did come back. And he was ready. And this crowd gathered. And I can imagine the smile. Can you imagine with me the smile on that guy's face as he watches his friends and his loved ones, his family, those that wanted nothing to do with him, and now they're hearing Jesus too. Wow. What a story. So as we read this week, we get to see these stories unfolding. These are the details that we're going to read, and I try not to go over all the details. There's more in there that you'll see, but I want you to see the big picture of what's going to unfold. Because this is exciting reading, isn't it? Okay. Any questions? My clock still says 5 after 6, so. All right. Let's go ahead and close in prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for your love for us. Thank you for the plans that you have for us, for each one of us. And as we read tonight, that you are Lord over all. You are Lord over the storms, over all creation. You are the Lord over demons. You are the Lord over illness. You are the Lord over death. And we want to be in love with you because we feel like you are Lord over all. Help us as we read this week to not just understand, but help us to be changed. Because just as the man had been restrained with chains, and just as the woman had spent all of her money trying to make herself better, all too often we try to make ourselves better on our own strength. But it's only through your miraculous touch that we have hope. Change us, please. Heal us. Remind us that we're your sons and your daughters. In your name we pray. Amen.